ready, Chris?
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the first of 5 school safety and security community conversations jointly hosted by MCCPTA and MCPS. I'm Lynn Harris. I am the president of MCCPTA, and I'm also an MCPS teacher. And I'm very happy that we are starting this series of events. Safety and security in all of its guises is very much on the minds of all of our school communities, students, parents, teachers, staff. And what we're coming to understand is school safety and security means different things to different people. And that, especially from the perspective of our students, it's much more than just the bricks and mortar and the structural elements of security that some like to be a student in our schools. What does that experience feel like every day? Do they feel safe? Do they feel welcome? Do they feel valued being exactly who they are every day? And so, featured in these conversations is not only Ed Clark, our Director of Safety and Security for MCPS, but also Dr. Connolly, who's the lead psychologist in MCPS. So we welcome your questions. We welcome your input. We hope to see many of you at the 4 events that will follow this one. And now I'm going to turn it over to Derek Turner.
All right, thanks everyone. Thanks for coming out tonight. My name is Derek Turner. I'm the Director of Communications and your friendly neighborhood public information officer for Montgomery County Public Schools. And we're really excited to be here. And I want to first of all introduce our great panel of folks for today. First, we have Dr. Christina Connolly, the Director of Psychological Services for MCPS. Then we have Ed Clark, our Chief Safety Officer for MCPS. And last but not least, we have Gillian Hubner, our MCCPTA Liaison for the School Climate and Safety Committee. So thank you guys for being here. This is an informal conversation. I'm going to call everyone by their first name. I hope you are not offended, Dr. Connolly.
I'm not offended at all.
So to get started, I guess we should just kind of introduce ourselves and how we got to the field of safety and security. So Christina, you're up first.
All right. So thank you for having me. First and foremost, I'm a school psychologist, and I started my school psychology practice in the Waukegan Public Schools outside of Chicago, where I first came into school safety crisis response when my elementary school caught on fire as my first year person. And from there, I helped to create a district school crisis intervention team. And then that led me into overall school safety and crisis response in that district. And then it led to me to become the director of crisis intervention and safety there. But then I decided to move home, and then I took the job here as coordinator and then director of psychological services here in MCPS.
All right, Ed, what brought you back to MCPS?
Well, I'm a lifelong resident of Montgomery County, born and raised here. Proud graduate of Wheaton High School. Served my community here for 25 years with the Montgomery County Department of Police. Retired, and then in 2000, I took the position of Director of School Safety and Security. Was here for 6 years. Many of you remember the crisis that we dealt with, both at the national level and the local level then. The first year we had 9/11. The next year we had the sniper incidents where we had 6 out of the 10 homicides were in Montgomery County, and those are very, very significant incidents. After I stayed for 6 years, then did some consulting in school safety and security, and then following the tragedy at Sandy Hook, the state of Maryland decided to implement a Maryland Center for School Safety. We were like one of the 12 throughout the country. So the last 5 years, I served in that role as the executive director for the Maryland Center for School Safety. Then I had a great opportunity to come back here to work for the superintendent, work for the school community here. So I've been on board since December 3rd. So I am recycled, but I'm very glad to be back here.
And Gillian, you're one of our most passionate advocates around safety and security, and you're also our current Volunteer of the Year from MCCPTA. If you don't believe me, you can check the hallway. There's a big picture of her. Tell me about your passion and your experience with safety and security.
Thanks. Well, first and foremost, I'm a parent, so I think most parents have a sort of natural passion around this. Professionally, I'm a child protection and development person. I worked overseas in a number of war zones, and so I'm sort of, I guess I have conflict and crisis in my DNA professionally. So it seems like a natural way to bring it into the, not to bring the conflict and the crisis, but to bring the passion and some of the skills related to prevention and community building.
So we're going to try to divide this conversation into 4 key parts. One, we're going to talk about infrastructure in our buildings. We're going to talk about mental health. Then we're going to talk about an area you have shown interest in, the new lockdown with options active assailant training. And then we're going to take questions from the audience and from the community. We've gotten dozens of questions from the community ahead of time, so we're really excited to get to that part as well. So first, let's talk a little bit about our school buildings and infrastructure. Over the last 4 or 5 years, we've actually made several big enhancements around our school building safety and structure, some of them quite obvious and some of them less obvious. Ed, can you tell us a little bit about those changes and how we're keeping our buildings safe?
Sure, Derek, be delighted to. And the school district has done a really good job here. We've developed a strategic plan, multi-year strategic plan. Some of the changes you may see as parents or teachers or community members, we've certainly increased the security at the front entrances to our schools. And Derek and I were just talking before, in all of our public schools, we should absolutely make sure and ensure, and the requirement is that during those academic days, that all of our school doors should be properly secured there. So you may see some opportunities come through sort of a vestibule where sort of a controlled entranceway there, much like when we go to some of our banking institutions there. It's sort of that opportunity where it's an extra set of doors that you would have to check in with. When you come into the front lobby, a new visitor management control system where you would have to check in, identify who you are, the purpose of your visit. Those databases, when you scan in or enter your information, they're checked against the local and national sex abuse registries to make sure that we don't have anyone who may be on those lists there. So that's some things that you'll see right away when you come in there. Also, we have a very, I think, dynamic CCTV initiative. We've had that at the high school level and the middle school level for a number of years, Derek. We're now starting to come down to the elementary school level to make sure that we have those structures in place there to support safety and security. A lot of training, we'll probably get into that a little bit later there, but that's sort of the logistical where we are. And again, we have a growth plan, try to make sure that we continue to improve safety and security K through 12 throughout the school district there.
And so that's great. There's a lot that we've done in terms of infrastructure, adding cameras and the vestibules and the access control system. But I think at the end of the day, it's really about the people, right? So there's a lot that involves staff taking new roles. Can you talk a little bit about what role staff are playing?
Well, certainly we want to make sure that everybody is greeted professionally and friendly when you come into your school building. But hopefully there's an opportunity to have a conversation. You know, you may be asked who you're here to see. Come right into the secured area there where you can check in. So we do that for a reason, because if there's a crisis in the building, we're not only accountable for our students and our staff, but for any visitors. If there's a serious incident, we have to account for everyone in that school building there. So it's important that people check in. The goal is not to allow access inside the main structure of the building, to sort of funnel in and make sure that everyone checks in there. The other thing, training the front office staff. Every school in our school district has an on-site emergency team, and they're trained in school safety and emergency preparedness under the structure of the incident command system. So that's very, very important. And then we'll get into a little bit later, Derek, I think, when we talk about the requirements of a number of school safety drills, emergency preparedness drills. So having those conversations with our principals, we're very fortunate in this county at the high school level. We have school resource officers that are in the school. They're an integral part of that whole school safety and security posture. So we have representation certainly from the Montgomery County Department of Police, Gaithersburg City Police Department, Rockville City, and the Montgomery County Sheriffs. So they're very familiar with our school safety and security protocols, what needs to occur when we host a series of drills and practices. So they're really that first responder there. But the true first responders or any school emergency or crises is going to be our classroom teachers. So that's why it's so important that they're properly trained. They know what to do every day. Because what they do in those first moments really will set the stage how successful we will be. So again, the need for ongoing training, repetitive training, and having conversations like this at the school building level.
And even our students have an important role in safety. They're often the eyes and ears, the first ones to see when an emergency is happening. So it's important that they play a role, right?
You know, Derek, I think you're right. And that's probably the biggest group that we haven't engaged in enough, our young students, because they have the responsibility too. If they see something, say something. More importantly, do something. Don't sit on that sideline when you think another student might be in crisis or you see something that's concerning to you. We want to engage our students. So I think not only in this school system but throughout the state, we need to do a better job of engaging those students, because all of us here tonight, whether we're parents, school system employees, public safety people, students at all ages, we all have a collective role. It's just no longer the role of that building principal to look out for school safety, security, emergency preparedness. So again, having that conversation with our students at the age-appropriate level, we'll know that Dr. Conley will talk about that a little bit later in the program, what that means. But that's important to engage our students.
And so you actually mentioned earlier our partnership with law enforcement and the role of the SRO and the school resource officer in our school buildings. Tell me a little bit about that role and what's the distinction between what the school resource officer does and what our security assistants do. And we have actually several security assistants in all of our high schools and middle schools, correct?
We do. We have teams of school safety and security personnel that are trained. Many are ex-public safety employees. Many have worked with the Department of Corrections. They have great skills in diffusing and working with students. So at that high school level, there's a team. And at the middle school level, we have safety and security officers. They are employees of the school district here. But then we're also augmented by those school resource officers. So again, it's that partnership and the relationship is so critical. So everyone knows what their role is during that emergency or crisis. And it's really, really important for those SROs to be actively engaged in practicing the emergency preparedness drills. And we'll talk a little bit later about the active shooter or the lockdown with options trigger. But they're so important because they also have the opportunity to develop relationships with students. So if they know particular students and maybe that's a bad day, just engage in a friendly conversation, what's going on. So they're an ambassador for school safety throughout our school buildings in the community.
And one of the things that I think is correct, and just confirm, that there are now school resource officers five days a week, and I know that's important to MCC-PTA.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's correct. And we'll talk a little bit later about significant legislation was brought forth last year from Governor Hogan and the Maryland legislature, the Maryland Safe to Learn Act. And that act requires, if we do not have SROs this year at the high school level, then we have to have what is called an adequate law enforcement coverage plan. So starting next year, that plan will have to be in place for all K through 12 schools throughout the state of Maryland. So what does that mean? If our school doesn't have an assigned SRO, what does that model look like? So again, working with our law enforcement partners, having those conversations. So in the event that it is a critical emergency, that we can be assured of a rapid response to mitigate that emergency throughout the K through 12 level.
And one of the things I think it's important for everyone to know that we actually have an MOU around our school resource officers that distinguishes the roles. And if I'm correct, the SRO isn't involved in the disciplinary process. The day-to-day discipline of a school, that's not the role of law enforcement. We're not trying to put our students into the criminal justice system for small infractions of, disrespect in the classroom. But they're really there for school and building safety when there are major events, right?
And building relationships with those students. Because in a lot of ways, the officers will see the students maybe in a different role within the community and vice versa. So sort of knocking down some of those barriers that may exist on both sides and getting to build those relationships. Because we want our young students to feel comfortable coming to that school resource officer in the moment of crisis or need, knowing that they won't be judged, they'll be supported and directed for proper resources.
So we've talked a lot about our law enforcement partners, but we clearly don't do this just with them. We have tons of partners in our community that play an important role. Christina, do you want to talk about some of those partners that you work with that help around safety and security?
Yeah, so in looking at still school safety, from my side of the coin, we have to look at how do we balance both physical and psychological safety. And so in looking at the mental health services that we provide, they are true keys to prevention. And that we're working with the mental health of our students and of our staff, it truly can lead to environments where students feel connected, that students feel heard, that students feel that they are getting the resources that they need in order to be successful in school. I know several of our partners are here with us today. We have several folks from the Department of Health and Human Services in Montgomery County, through our Crisis Center, through SASCA. We have representatives from Everymind, and of course, my favorite school psychologists are here in the back as well. For those of you in the room, they can go back at the end and they have resources and information for you as well. And so we all work together in order to provide mental health support. Within my office, the Office of Student and Family and Support and Engagement, we work with our school counselors, our school PPWs, the pupil personnel workers, our parent community coordinators, the PCCs, the ETCs, our ESOL transition counselors, and our psychologists, in working with our parents, working with our administrators, working with our school safety partners, all together in order to make sure that we have a well-rounded school safety initiatives here within the county.
And Ed, are there other partners with law enforcement? I know that we work with Fire and Rescue.
Absolutely, fire and rescue is critical. They're there every day in the event of a medical emergency. In a critical emergency, they will be coming too. Initially, they will not go into what is known as the hot zone. When we're in a moment of crisis there, if we do have an active assailant, they're not going in. They're going to wait and work with law enforcement so it's safe so they can get in there and administer critical first aid and life-saving measures there. So again, you know, that's all part of the overall public safety partnership. And the great thing about our public safety partners, they're just like everyone here. They've got kids too in school. So they have a vested interest in working together with the community.
And Gillian, as I think the most important partner we have around school climate and safety, MCCPTA has the School Climate and Safety Committee. What does the committee do, and how can someone contribute if they're just a member of the community, and funnel questions into you?
So MCCPTA is sort of a hub of all the PTAs within the county. So if there are issues related to anything related to school climate or safety, we sort of help direct to resources that are in the school system or outside. We also have developed a good pathway so that if concerns are raised to us, that we can bring them to you and help a school community figure out how to solve them. One of the things that we're very aware of is that when crisis hits, especially in this social media age, helping a community navigate and get accurate information is so key. And trying to also just make sure that the right information is flowing, that the fear is not impacting a clear-headed response. So I think that's something that we want to be working on as well moving forward, is just making sure that in the case of crisis or conflict, that there are guidelines in terms of what we can mutually expect in terms of communication and what you need from us, what parents and communities need to hear from the school system, and just making sure that that's really clear so that we can plow through hard times.
So I want to pivot just a little bit to issues of mental health and the intersection with safety. And so, Christina, you know, we're in a heightened sense of anxiety and awareness around how mental health intersects with security. Talk a little bit what that looks like for Montgomery County and for our students in schools.
Right. And so when we're looking at mental health, MCPS is truly dedicated to providing appropriate mental health services for our students. Our superintendent has engaged our office in supporting what's called our PSP framework, or our physical, social, and psychological well-being framework. And within that, we have 6 essentials that look at different aspects of mental health and student well-being. The first looks at character education and building empathy, then looking at mental health awareness and well-being, looking at trauma-informed or trauma-sensitive schools, Also restorative justice and conflict resolution, physical health awareness and well-being, and looking at building positive relationships with others and within ourselves. And so as we look at this intersection and how we balance both physical and psychological safety, earlier I talked about the preventative efforts. And so we know that when students are connected, have relationships with a trusted adult in the building, they're working in terms of having an understanding of who they are, their personal well-being, how to get support for themselves and also their friends, and how all of that impacts school safety. When students potentially are at risk for depression, anxiety, maybe they're having an eating disorder, maybe they're at risk of having of self-injury, at risk of suicidal ideation, or even in terms of other, not as common, but potentially being at risk of harming others. And so all of these pieces, our PSP framework helps us in terms of providing us a place where we can start working with students earlier on, starting in preschool and going all the way up through 12th grade, in terms of providing the interventions, providing the supports for students, so maybe they won't have these kind of high needs, high intense concerns around potentially wanting to harm themselves or harming others. Because we know that when those issues come back, that impacts the school, that impacts potentially the safety of others. And so everything that we can do to try to prevent those occurrences from occurring, that we're going to do everything possible in order to make sure that those needs are met so that students can achieve and that they can be successful in life.
So we are just days after the anniversary of the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas tragedy, and one of the things that was brought to light is the aspect of mental health and students and being aware of potential threats in the community and how they can impact schools. One of the terms that I've heard a lot since then is behavioral threat assessment.
Yes.
So can you talk a little about what that is, and then how does that implemented in Montgomery County Public Schools, and maybe then Ed can chime in about what it looks like, because there's legislation behind this as well.
Sure, maybe if I could start out from the legislative point last year. As a result of the tragedy that occurred last year at Parkland, and then on March 20th of last year, we had our own Maryland tragedy, not far from here in St. Mary's County at Great Mills High School. A young student by the name of Jalen Willie was shot and killed in the morning, and this was a bad relationship that occurred. As a result of those two critical incidents, Governor Hogan, our legislature, came together and they passed that very comprehensive Maryland Safe to Learn Act of 2018. And part of that act is that every public school moving forward, and Dr. Conley will talk a little bit more about this in depth, has to have a behavioral threat assessment team. The state, when I was at the state, we developed the overall guidelines for the local school districts to sort of follow. So now it's up to each local school district to sort of develop their own guidelines that would be in sync with the state guidelines to start in this direction. And the whole key here is, Derek, and I'm sure Dr. Conley will agree, is that if we see something, we want to intervene as early as we can. If someone who may be on a pathway of targeted violence, whether it be a student, staff member, or community member, the goal of that process or that team is to get them off of that pathway, to get them the help and the intervention that they need. So then I know that Dr. Conley and her team has been working very, very hard as to what that means for us.
Yes.
So I'm going to turn it back over to Christina, and she can just kind of explain where we are and
Right.
where we want to be.
And so MCPS is in the process of training our staff, and within the law, it requires that building administration, mental health staff members, which can be the school counselor, the school psychologist, the school social worker, as well as law enforcement, as well as someone who has an understanding or training in curriculum, are pulling together with this team that will review instances of either a student or others who may, as Ed says, on the pathway to violence. So what does that mean? So let's say we have a student who hears from a friend or someone in the cafeteria that says, oh, wouldn't it be funny to go and, shoot somebody at one of the football games or something, who knows what. And so that process then comes about, so then just say they report it to a staff member, which we want everybody to do, right? Or to their parents. And that information report, we're gonna do, this team is gonna come together and look at to see, so first of all, is this accurate? Because is it just someone who's just, saw something on TV and is just repeating what they said, or is this somebody who truly potentially has a threat to harm others? And if they do, we're gonna talk with the individual, talk with their teachers, talk with their parents, talk with their friends, and gather additional information about what's going on. And that's what we call a grievance, as to looking at the reasons as to why this person wants to go and harm others. And when we look at behavioral threat assessment, I want to be clear in that this is not a disciplinary process, that this is a process for providing interventions to those that may be on that pathway. Because we know, and looking at research that's come out from the United States Secret Service, and that if we can provide interventions, if we can find what's going on with these students, why do they want to go out and harm others, and put interventions and programs and supports in place to help that student, we can get them off of that pathway and get them back to a place where school is a safe place, that school is potentially providing the resources and supports so they can be academically successful. And so again, that process is about providing interventions to others, providing interventions to those students, and also potentially, if there's a target, providing supports to that individual as well. And so we're all working together as a team. We may include, so let's say if the student has a 504 plan, we're going to make sure to include their counselor. If they're in special ed, we're going to make sure to include the special education teacher. Or maybe they need other sources of supports that maybe they need wraparound services for the family because maybe the family is in need. There could be a multitude of things that we're looking at. This is an individualized process. There is not a one-size-fits-all. There is no kind of like cookbook and say, well, this is what we do. We look at each case, each student individually, and we provide supports based upon that student's need.
And I'd just like to point out, too, we will have law enforcement as needed participate, but this is not a criminal justice initiative either. Law enforcement will be notified when there's an immediate and imminent threat, as we would normally make a 911 call. So the team may be activated later, but if that risk is so high, we're going to make that 911 call, just like our principals, or if you're in the community and you see something, you're going to make that call. Absolutely. The other thing in the law, it also applies to community risk. So if we had a member of the community who may be on a pathway of targeted violence toward the school or the school community, this team would also be activated, and that's where there's a need for law enforcement, because we have no jurisdiction over citizens within our community, even though they may pose a risk or a threat to our schools or our school community. So that's why it's important to have law enforcement on that team and to reach out to them when it's appropriate.
Right. And just remember that this is a research-informed process. The U.S. Secret Service uses it, law enforcement and school security experts around the country use this. And so we're very thankful that we're working with other consultants around the country to help us as we are in the process of developing this, finalizing this process. There should be a board policy that comes out. It's required by the state law by September 1st, 2019. And so we are fully engaged in this, and we are in the process. Actually, we have a training coming up for staff the first week of March. So we are continuing to go through all of this and making sure that our staff are prepared for providing these types of supports in schools.
And these teams will save lives. There's
Absolutely.
no question about it. They will save lives, and that's what it's about. Yes. Derek, I just want to say one thing. As a result of these tragedies, and you can see I'm an old soul, but I will tell you, I was very, very moved with the tragedy that occurred at Great Mills High School last year. It's different when you see tragedies that are close to your community or your state, and we knew the principal down there, we knew the security, we knew the staff. We were there, myself and my partner were there within an hour. And to see the crises and the trauma what they went through and what they're still continuing on. It's really reaffirmed my personal and professional belief, and Dr. Connolly was right, the more that we can collectively do in the area of prevention and intervention is where we need to be as a community. Because what we have seen, this trauma can be so devastating that people, students, staff, community members just can't recover. So the more that we can do on that front end is really where we need to be, I think, Derek, as this collective community, trying to do the best that we can.
So we've talked about a lot about students who might cause harm to others, but I think there's another side to this, students who could potentially cause harm to themselves. And we've actually been focused on this for the last several years. And one of the new initiatives is, let me make sure I get this right, the SOS, or the Signs of Suicide initiative at our upper schools, or at our secondary schools. Can you talk a little bit about that program and how it's being distributed?
Yes, so starting last winter, we started implementing what's called the Signs of Suicide Prevention Program, and starting at the start there, we are implementing that program grades 6 through 12. And this is a program, this is a research-based program that we took from off of the SAMHSA list of best practice programs for looking at suicide prevention. And so the program involves providing information and training to our students on what are the signs to look for when a student potentially is suicidal, what are the signs to look for when they're depressed. Because we know that when kids are struggling with these kinds of issues, many times they may not go to an adult. We want them to go to adults. As a parent myself, we want our children to come to us, right? But we know that that's not always the case, especially with adolescents. Who are they more likely to go to? They're more likely to go to their friends. And we want all the students to know what's going on, what are the signs to look for. And so one of the biggest premises of this program is that they teach kids how to act. And of course, education loves our acronyms, right? And so within ACT, it is the first, how to acknowledge your friend's feelings, how to care for them, and then how to tell a trusted adult. The videos and other lessons, they go through scenarios that show students, like if your friend is acting this way or they say these things, what are the things that we want you to do? What are the signs to look for? How to go out and seek help from a parent, how to go seek help from potentially a coach or your counselor, your psychologist in the schools, where to go and get the support from, and to not keep a secret, to make sure that you never make promises to never tell, and that you always go forth and tell a trusted adult. And so the program, and as we're looking at this, and students have the ability, after they go through the educational piece, that they can go forth and either refer themselves or refer their friends down to the counselor suite at the school to talk to the psychologist or the social worker or the counselor in the school to get additional help for themselves and their friends. And with this program across the country, we see this increase of students who finally they've been taught to go get help, go tell somebody, because they're seeing their friends online. They're on Snapchat. Right? We're not always, friends with them or following them on these social media platforms, but their friends see this and they come forward and they tell us and they show us, the snap or the tweet or the picture on Instagram of somebody saying goodbye. And so this program has shown that kids will come forward and tell us, and it is our efforts, part of our PSP framework, in terms of what can we do in order to make sure students understand. And with the standalone program, we're doing this at the secondary level.
So you brought up social media, which I think is of interest to our entire audience and something that all of us deal with. We're seeing a sharp spike in social media threats in the last few years. The advent of social media has created a whole new world where bullying and threats now exist. Not to say that they didn't exist before. Our schools got bomb threats 20 years ago, and it was part of the process. But we're seeing more and more of these, and they're having a greater and greater impact on our schools and our communities.
Yes.
Can you guys talk about a little bit about how MCPS handles social media threats, who we work with, what the process looks like?
Sure, Derek. And that's we need your help. We need your help as students. We need your help as parents, community members. we've seen, as Derek said, across the state of Maryland the last several years, incredible spike in these social media threats. And generally, they're retweeted, they're reposted, they go viral. And a lot of these talk about school shootings, or it's unsafe to come to school today, there's going to be a school shooting. So when we get those threats during the academic day and well beyond the academic day, at all hours of the night, we will reach out to our local law enforcement partners, and they will evaluate the threats. They will assign resources or detectives to run these threats down. They're very challenging to run down and to fully investigate because our students are so savvy in social media, and it's very easy to conceal one's identity. So there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes to try to identify who that sender may be. One thing that came out of the tragedy in St. Mary's County last year, and we're seeing this across the state with local law enforcement, the term or the phrase is putting law enforcement boots in the living room at 2 a.m. to have a conversation with parents and students. If it's a threat, a social media threat, especially one that involves the display or the mentioning of a firearm. So our local law enforcement officers are going out, trying to have a conversation just to sort of verify or to eliminate that threat. So then when that information comes back to us in school safety and security, we'll be able to share that information back with the local principal because, as we know, it causes great anxiety and concern. And then how do we get out there in front of this messaging to let everyone know that the school's okay? And the overwhelming majority, 99.9% of these threats, they are found or deemed not to be credible. But they're very, very concerning. We've seen throughout the state of Maryland when these threats occur, the next day, a reduction in attendance, which translates to lost academic time. We see the impact to communities. We see the impact of parents, PTA members calling the principal, asking for reassurances. And one thing I want to say, working with our police partners, we may have that very next day additional support from law enforcement, just as a precaution, just to sort of make sure that we're sending the right message. That doesn't mean that there's a significant problem. That just means we're trying to take an additional measure to ensure the community that our schools are safe. So again, we need everyone's help. What we would say to our students, if you see those messaging, please don't repost, retweet, whatever it's called. Take a message, get it to that trusted adult in the building, whether it be your school principal, counselor, or teacher, or to that school resource officer, and let them do what they're trained to do to run these threats down. But again, if we can start to minimize those threats, we'll all be in a better place there.
If I can add something there. So parents are often very clear about what they would like the school system to do, right? I don't think the school system has the same latitude to say what they would like parents to do. So I'll maybe be an intermediary here. But, you know, I think it's frustrating. There's a lot of talk about social media and access to phones and whatnot in the schools. And, you know, the schools, in a sense, don't really have a choice whether or not we give our children these devices to come into school with. But if we do, as long as our children are under the age of 18, what they do on social media is our responsibility. And I think if we don't have a mind's eye to what our kids are actually engaging in on social media, we're part of the problem. And I think, you know, just scanning what your child is doing a couple times a week, you know, letting your child know that actually this is not their private space to just engage. It's something that we're involved in because we're their parents and we care what's going on. I think that that has a huge deterring effect on the kind of misbehavior we sometimes see online. So that's just a plea from the Safe Tech. You know, this is sort of a parenting, I think there's some parenting malpractice out there when it comes to not monitoring what our kids are doing online. So let's also kick that up as part of the response here.
Right, and I would say that, so what Gillian is talking about also then goes into cyberbullying. And we see that as a potential threat within our schools as well, and how that impacts our students. And that over the years, so even looking at data from the CDC and from the National Institute of Educational Statistics, you see that rates of cyberbullying has been steadily on the rise over the past decade. And that we want to make sure that parents know that when you see this occur, your student comes and reports this to you, that again, as Ed talked about, same thing with the social media threats, you need to take a screenshot. You need to report that to your building administration and get this additional assistance for your child. Many of the social media platforms, Snapchat and Twitter, allow for individuals to block the person that is engaging in the cyberbullying. It allows you to report it so that there can be an investigation that takes place on those social media platforms. And many times parents and students aren't aware of that. But also being aware there are multiple sites that that cyberbullying is taking place on. It's not just Snapchat or Twitter or Instagram. There are even using like the WhatsApp, which is a way for our students, even our younger students who don't have access to a cell phone, they can go online, go on their tablet, download that app and make phone calls to people. And it does not monitor it the way if you're looking on your calling page on your phone. Apps like Kik, and many other ones,
And games.
Vine, games, yes, going online, engaging with other students across the country and around the world, using different games. There are a lot of ways that this can happen. And one of the biggest issues of concern, because when growing up, so bullying has occurred in our schools for as long as probably if there have been schools, right? But the issue around cyberbullying is that it takes place 24 hours a day. And that many times it's going on at night when parents are asleep and they're unaware of that their children have their phones or that they're on their computers or Chromebooks or on their tablets or other electronic devices. And that not only does this cause a sense of embarrassment to the students, but that it can be shared with not just your class are seeing it or maybe those you're walking home with or so forth, but the whole school, if not the whole district. I have seen situations where something happens at a school down county, and all of a sudden I got a friend who's hearing about it in Howard County. I mean, just how quickly, and it spreads rapidly. So when students come to you and say, you know, this is going on and they're being bullied and that this is a real concern to them, take that seriously. And that go and seek help, because a lot of times students feel powerless around it. It's the bully that has the power, the victim that does not. And many students that are watching this, we call them the bystanders, they don't feel they have the power to stand up and be an upstander and do something around that. And so we as adults really have to be the ones to come in to help with that. But I need all of you, as the parents, as community members, when you see this, come and tell us. Because many times we don't know. People kind of assume, oh, the building, the teachers know, the principal knows. No, many times we do not. Kids have a funny way of hiding stuff. And that we really need all of your help in helping us to know what's going on so that we can act upon it, so that we can appropriately investigate it. There is a form that you can fill out, a bullying form. You can fill that out, turn that into a teacher or a building administrator, and that starts us in the process of the investigation of what's going on. And so that form can be found online. If you go onto the MCPS webpage, to the search bar, click in bullying form, it'll pop right up. And so
And
we
you
just
can
want
also report through the tip line.
Oh, yeah, oh, yes, well, that's another way, definitely. And through the new Maryland State tip line, you can also report that information through there. And I'm going to tell you, so Ed and I receive them, and people do read them. So we want people to know that when you report stuff through the tip line, we do get them. And so we read every one. And so whether it's at midnight, 1 in the morning, 6 a.m., we get them, so.
And the tip line's up on the screen for folks, so if you want to write it down. It's 833-632-7233 or 833-MD-BE-SAFE.
And there's also an app, so you don't even need to call.
Yes.
You can submit something directly online.
And that's a new statewide initiative, again, brought out by these tragedies by Governor Hogan, launched earlier this year. We have continuous updates on the, I guess, success and the progress of the statewide tip line. The good thing for us here in Montgomery County Public Schools and our community, it appears that we are the leader in receiving tips, which is good. And I will tell you, Dr. Conley, we're on that list. So we've
Yeah.
gotten these calls at 2 a.m. in the morning. And a lot of these tips have been kids in crises, where we've been able to intervene, again, working with our law enforcement partners at midnight or 2 a.m. We had one that was very, very significant, and I absolutely know that through the intervention, we saved this young student's life. Now, the hero in that tip was not an adult. It was a fellow student who was so concerned about the safety and the well-being of their friend and fellow student, they called it in. And it was severe enough that we immediately went to 911. Montgomery County Police went out, intervened, spoke to the student, made sure that they were okay. Working back with Dr. Conley, then we had that follow-up and that wraparound approach. So this is very, very important. We've gotten a lot of really good tips and leads, so I think it's a great initiative.
So on the social media front, just to speak to our students who are in the room or who are out there, just we often think that social media is immediate and kind of goes away, but social media follows you through your entire life. There was a recent study that said 34% of employers have rejected employees based on their social media past. Just think about that. What you're doing now can affect you from getting employed in the future. So it's important to think about both how you're impacting other people, but also your own personal success moving forward.
And I think the other caution for our students is be careful what you send. Those type of maybe compromising pictures, they will stay with you. The other thing is you could be in violation of the law. If those pictures are deemed to be pornographic in nature, that's a technical violation of state law. So a lot of times I don't think our students understand that. They get caught up in that. There might be some human trafficking involved as well down the road. But again, everybody thinks it doesn't follow. As Derek says, it stays with you.
Right, your grandchildren can see it. Just be aware of that. It stays with you forever. Okay.
And that, I think, note goes to parents, too, in terms of protecting children's privacy online. A lot of parents are posting very personal stuff about their children's lives and information about other kids at schools with, identifiable information. And that's risky, too.
Right. And MCPS is engaged in what's called a curriculum and training with students on what's called digital citizenship. And it starts in kindergarten and it goes up through 12th grade. And there are lessons that schools engage in that teach students many of this information at a developmentally appropriate level. You may be like, what does my kindergartner need to know? But kindergartners are on your tablets. My little one was on my iPod Touch, at like 1. And she figured out how to swipe and do everything else. And I'm thinking, like, how did she learn how to do that? But they learn quickly. And so from early on, we need to teach kids how to protect their passwords. Don't share them, not even with your best friend. And different sites to go to that are safe. And any of these things. So MCPS is engaged in this and trying to teach them, but we need our parents to also be engaged and follow up on this and continue these efforts on what we teach at home. And so, and as Gillian said, it's correct. So if your child has a phone, who pays for that phone? Who pays the bill for that phone? So is that phone that child's personal property? As a parent, I'm like, no, it's my phone. I'm paying for it. And so inspect it. And let students know that that's, that when you have the phone, part of the privilege of having the phone that I'm paying for is that I have the right to go through and inspect it at will. And that is the same thing as, back in the day, my parents go through my room, and seeing what's there. It's the same thing with your phone. And it helps to maintain the safety of your kid. And so, because you don't know what potentially they may engage in, as Ed talked about with, I sit on the Human Trafficking Task Force in Montgomery County. It's horrible, the stories that you hear and how young that starts. And so, and the grown adults that are engaging with our students starting in middle school. And so you want to make sure that you are aware of this for bullying, all sorts of school safety and reasons why you're looking at their phones and seeing what's going on with their lives.
And we know you might hear complaints from your middle school kids or middle school
Yes.
students saying, why is MCPS blocking access to Facebook and Twitter and all these outlets on the network? It's because we're trying to keep you safe. That we're trying to restrict who can get in and who can access you at least during the school day. And all those sites actually have age restrictions, and we need to make sure that we adhere to those age restrictions. If they say you have to be 14 or 15, wait till the kid is 14 or 15, because there are predators out there that we need to be concerned about.
Yes.
So as we think about parents supporting their kids on social media, we also need to think about parents seeing changes in their kids and what those can mean. So what should a parent do if they see changes in their kids' behavior, and what kind of changes should be reported to the school?
Right. And so if you're seeing a change in your child's behavior, please come and report it to your teacher, to the building administrator, to your counselor, your psychologist in the school. And changes in behavior can be, let's say you have this happy-go-lucky child, and all of a sudden for 2 weeks they're sad, depressed, they don't want to leave their room, they don't want to talk, they stop eating. Maybe teenagers sleep a lot, but sleeping more than what you normally see. Or even, let's say you have a child, maybe they have a diagnosis of depression, they're on medication, they're seeking treatment, and then all of a sudden, like they've been on that path for, let's say, a month, and all of a sudden they become happy. And I tell teachers all the time, when I see a student who is chronically depressed and all of a sudden becomes happy, and it isn't due to something like their treatment or something else is going on, and it's just been constant, and it just clicks, and all of a sudden the kid is happy. People all of a sudden are like, oh, my child is happy, my student's happy, I'm so glad for them. We're just so engaged that, they're in this happy place now. They've been so sad for so long. And then all of a sudden we hear reports of students then who have died by suicide. That change in behavior can be an indication that, especially when you have a child who has gone from sad to all of a sudden happy, that they have potentially have made a plan for how to die by suicide. And so all those changes, again, from any change, from happy to sad, from sad to happy, let somebody know. So that we can go have a conversation with the student. If you are immediately concerned at home, we do have a Montgomery County Crisis Center. You can send them. The Crisis Center is open 24 hours a day. You can send them to there, and they can do an evaluation for the student. So let's say if your concern is at night, or it's on the weekend when the child is not in school, or even over the summer. And so we just want to make sure that parents are aware of these things, and when you're starting to see that, that is usually an indication that something is going on.
All right. So we're going to pivot a little bit to safety drills. I know that there's been a lot of conversations and a lot of media reports and a lot of anxiety around how trainings around active assailants trainings and active shooter trainings are going. So we have several. First, let's talk about all the drills we have in MCPS and how they all play a role in safety. So Ed, can you talk about all the many drills we go through?
Absolutely. Every public school in the state of Maryland is required to practice 6 emergency preparedness school safety drills from the Maryland State Department of Education. That's been on the books for quite a while. And they are an evacuation, shelter in place, reverse evacuation, lockdown, drop, cover, and hold, and then a severe weather drill. Now, on top of that, we have regular fire drills that we practice also. Every public school in the state of Maryland is also required to practice bus evacuation drills. So there's a lot of drills that we do on an ongoing and regular basis. And the reason why we do these drills, so we can be prepared in that moment of crisis or that true emergency. We've seen, because of the fire drill practicing, we have not lost a life in many, many years to a fire, a working fire in any school within the United States there. So again, going back, we know that if we've been well trained in that moment of crisis, we'll revert back to that training. If we haven't been trained very well, or we haven't practiced, we're going to get into a place where we don't want to be, where chaos and confusion can seek in, and then we're really, really in trouble there. So this school district has done a very, very good job of doing these drills. The primary drill was when we had a critical incident, we would lock down, secure in place. What we have found as a result of these horrific school shootings, and we look at best practices throughout this state and throughout the nation, one size doesn't fit all. So we are moving along with several other school districts in the state of Maryland to the lockdown with options approach. And what we're doing is we're trying to make everyone aware through training of the situation, situational awareness. So if there is a threat in a school building? How can we evaluate that threat as staff, teachers, security, and as students? Now, it may be the best course of action if you can lock down and secure in place. That's what we would want you to do. But if you have an opportunity to avoid the threat or the concern or the emergency, you may be better to flee that immediate area. So working with our Montgomery County Police partners, in particular Lieutenant Brian Dillman, who is a national school safety and a tactical expert. He is the commander of the local Montgomery County Police SWAT team. We have partnered the last several months, Derek, with our police partners to provide that training to our high school level, our middle school level, and we'll be going down to the elementary school level very, very soon. So again, practicing the drills through training, through scenario-based training, and saying you may be better served if you can get out. So what we come down is called avoid, deny, defend. So if we can avoid the danger and it's safe to, right now, if the threat was down the hallway, it would be safer for us to all evacuate out here, flee from the danger. So that's what we mean by avoid. Now deny, if we're not able to get out safely, or the classroom or the school isn't configured, then we're going to have to deny. And when we mean by deny, that means we're going to lock down in place, secure in place. And what we've seen through these tragedies, students have been very well trained. We want you to be aware of any protective assets in that classroom. So we might see right here, Derek, that table is right there. So if that was the door to the classroom coming in, we would sort of barricade. What we want to do is add layers of protection. What we're doing when we do deny entry, we're just increasing time. So when local law enforcement will get there to respond to that immediate threat, take mitigation action, we're just giving a little bit of time. Now if we get to the situation where we may have to defend, whether we're in the community or in the school building then, we're not teaching anybody or advocating that they be trained in martial arts. But that's that very, very critical moment. If an active assailant or an active shooter were to breach and get into that classroom, then we may have to take protective measures to defend. And that may be yelling and screaming at the active assailant to sort of disorientate that individual. It may be throwing something there. It may be swarming. But again, that's individual and an age-appropriate level. So that's when we get to that very, very critical point in time. And the thing about this type of training is it's very, very real and applicable if we're in a community environment. And we've seen these horrific events. They've occurred in our movie theaters. They've occurred most recently in our houses of worship. So what would we do? So we want to allow students and staff to have that same skill set if those things occur within the community setting, that they can make critical decisions and then go. So then we'll talk about accountability. When they go, they'll flee to a safe zone. We'll eventually have to reconcile accountability because we have the responsibility to, as best we can, to account for our students there. So this is a national trend, a statewide trend. The Maryland Safe to Learn Act is now requiring us to sort of go in that direction based on guidelines from the Homeland Security Department. In the state of Maryland, we have a Maryland Active Assailant Work Group. So those guidelines is what we want to sort of look at. So there's other models we've heard at the national level, run, hide, fight. There's the ALICE training. They're all very, very similar, and they're all predicated upon situational awareness and practicing an options-based approach.
I think it's important to know that we didn't come up with this strategy on our own. This was actually the Secret Service helped develop this strategy.
Well, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, you may have seen some of the videos out there. The city of Houston, Texas, they got a grant years ago, Run, Hide, Fight. It's workplace violence, same thing. So it's sort of that. Montgomery County government sort of has adopted for their county employees avoid, deny, defend model. So again, working with our law enforcement partners, Lieutenant Dillman or other members of the SWAT team and our school resource officers have been at these trainings just to kind of answer questions. And now it's up for us to sort of continue through the line of training, build on that training, so then we can conduct the drills. The goal will be once the weather breaks and we're in a good enough place where everybody's been trained up, then to actually perform the drill, because those drills will be required that will be an additional drill. So Montgomery County Public Schools is sort of ahead of things. We discuss these matters throughout the state on a regular basis. And again, the goal is to share best practices and to be able to make adjustments along the way.
So, well, I don't know, you're probably going to ask a leading question here, but this obviously freaks out parents, right? I mean, just the idea that we even have to think about these kind of things, and the idea that our children of whatever age, just having this so front and center in their awareness is upsetting, right? So we've heard a lot of parents say, okay, I'm going to find out when those trainings are, and I'm not going to let my kid go to school that day, or just upset that it's happening at all. Of course, last year before this was happening, we also heard from other parents who were very concerned that the lockdown training had not been updated. So we hear it from all sides. But I think, there's a real concern about how to do this and also be very mindful of student mental health and well-being, and just that constant fear. And how do you roll out a training like this and also take care of the psychosocial wellness of each kid who, and acknowledging that these kids may respond really differently. I mean, a kid who's like, all right, yeah, I'm going to throw something at a shooter, I'm fine with that. And another kid who might have really heightened anxiety and just be, so how do you balance that?
Well, the great thing working with Dr. Conley and other experts, this school district has sort of been proactive and had a work group together. And I'm going to let Dr. Conley address that aspect. But again, during these drills, there are counselors there for not only staff but students. If someone's not comfortable, we'll loop back through the counselors or the teachers, have those conversations there. I wasn't sure first until I went to see the drills. And I've seen the drills both at the high school level and in the middle school level. And I had some concern, was it too much at the middle school level? But I've been to two drills or trainings at the middle school level, and our students they're in a good place. They understand those risks more than what I would have thought. At the high school level, we've had some great conversations. They really get it at the high school level. And I was at one high school level. I'll tell you the high school because it was very, very encouraging. Seneca Valley, they had their training, and we do the scenario-based training. We kind of give students and staff, okay, here are the fact pattern. What would you do? It may be better to secure in place or lock down, or it may be better to flee away from the danger. But in that training, in that particular classroom that we were in, it was co-facilitated by the teacher and students. But what I was most impressed was that this group of students and the students at that high school were very concerned about fellow students. And they were very concerned about fellow students that had special needs, that they were supported and they were looked out for. That was very encouraging to moving to me, that the sensitivity of our students, not only that we're going to be okay, but make sure all students in the school environment were okay. So it is a very difficult conversation to have. I think it's a conversation that we have to have. If we didn't have this options-based approach, I'm not sure we're giving our students and staff the best information that's out there at the national level. But we need to be prepared for those emergency crises. So Dr. Conley's done a great job. And again, this is all age appropriate. One size will never fit all. But how we sort of got to where we are and using your expertise and the counselor's expertise to say, this is it. This is the best way for us to move forward here.
Right. And there was a committee that was formed with multiple stakeholders that helped to develop the active assailant training that has taken place so far at our high schools and our middle schools. And one of the resources that we use is a best practice document that was created by the National Association of School Psychologists and the National Association of School Resource Officers. And looking at that, it provides information on how to make sure that we're looking at the students' mental health needs, but also that we are conducting these drills in a developmentally appropriate fashion. So as Ed says, what what we do at the high schools with the training is not the same as what we would do at the elementary schools. And that also there are multiple ways of providing this type of training to our students and our staff. And so looking at guidance from FEMA, it goes into the different steps that you can follow when conducting a drill. So these drills are not, let's say, like what we call like full-scale drills, where you have the police coming in with blanks and weapons and doing it. This is not what we're doing here. We're starting at the lowest level in terms of providing these scenario-based trainings where we're going over with students and staff, like, so let's say if this happens, what are some things that you can do in order to ensure your safety? So like if you're in a classroom, how do you go and how do you deny? How do you lock down? How do you put the chairs up? And so that using that type of scenario-based training initially will help our students and our staff know what to do in going over the different scenarios that are available. That is following a developmentally appropriate fashion. Making sure that our elementary schools, when they start this, that they know, like, the biggest piece of that is to follow the adult in your classroom. We are not asking, you know, kindergartners to go defend themselves. That's not what MCPS is doing. But we want to make sure that all students know that you're going to follow what your teacher says, right? And so at that level, that is in a developmentally appropriate way. Just like as a parent, I would want my child in an emergency situation to follow me. We are teaching those same types of skills that you would teach your child at home, what to do when they're at school. Now at high school, they're going through and they spend more time and go over more details. With that, because students are older, their cognitive skills are a little bit more developed. They have higher order brain functionings than a kid who's younger. But we also, as Ed has said, being aware of students who have special needs. And that when we talk about age and developmental level are not the same thing. For our students who do have special needs, we are aware of them, and that we try to make sure that we are training them in a developmentally appropriate fashion in the place that where they are. And so, and all of us working together to ensure, like having our school-based mental health professionals during the trainings. And the majority of times that has been our school counselors who have been there to provide that type of support. Because we know that we may have some students who have experienced trauma, who may be, this may trigger the traumatic past that they may have had. The same thing with staff. We have staff who have experienced active shooting events in prior school districts. And so we are aware of that. We are providing appropriate supports for them. So let's say if they can't participate in the training, maybe we might do an individualized learning experience for them to help them know what the procedures are, and maybe not around everyone, because maybe they may feel a sense of, I don't want people to know that I've been through this, or I don't want to break down in front of my colleagues. And so what can we do to provide this in a way that is, we are aware that people may go through this, and we want to provide as much support as possible to ensure that all of our staff and students know what to do in the event that, I mean, again, active assailant situation is highly unlikely that these occur, but when they do occur, we want to make sure that we are prepared and that we are ready to make sure that all of our staff and students are safe.
Can I add one other thought? Julius West Middle School is one of the restorative justice schools, and they have done such a tremendous job sort of linking their restorative practices in community circles with these kind of drills. And so even after the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas shooting last year, they were aware, obviously, that their students were unnerved, and they took the opportunity to school-wide, in each individual class, create a restorative circle to help the kids process this kind of thing. And I think, you know, the principal was talking about how they're going to make sure that when these drills come through their school, that they're following up each drill with a restorative circle, which I thought was a really best practice. I mean, it takes time to do a drill, and it definitely takes time to do a restorative circle, but I feel like that's a really beautiful way of saying, this sucks, you know? It's horrible that we all have to go through this. And let's put our feet back on the ground and feel what this is, and also know that we're still a community and that we're gonna focus on that kind of well-being together. I thought that was a really, so I'd love to see more of that kind of thing happening along with this really sort of unnerving but maybe necessary.
Very important.
Yeah.
Jillian, I think our principals are very creative. One of the drills, well, really, sort of a misnomer, the drill. We're doing training. We haven't actually, it's sort of a simulated drill. We're discussing.
And Ed, it might be helpful that I actually have a scenario here so that the community can actually see what kids are experiencing in the conversations we're having.
And we can see here, this is one of the scenarios that is shown during the training there for the high school and the middle school students. So basically it says that, you've been alerted over the PA system to go into lockdown for an active assailant incident. You're in the hallway returning from seeing your counselor. You hear faint gunshots in this part of the school. So what should you do? So that's the discussion that we have. We can go to the next slide and you can see where there's options. And we go, get into the closest classroom or office, secure in place, lock down. Utilize usual lockdown procedures, locking the doors, turning off the lights. And one thing that we want to say, get into the hard corner. And what we mean by that hard corner, where that is the maximum safety zone away where we would be looking in the door. So teachers and staff have been trained to identify those hard corners within their classroom environments there. So that's where the students sort of be out of that line of sight or that zone of vision there. And then, or if the room is not available and you can get out and run to the nearest exit and get away safely, that's what we want you to do. So I think it's also important that our students and staff know we've got large buildings. Where are those exit points? Where do they go? Have that mental game plan in mind as to where you would go. One of the great things that we saw one of our middle school principals do, it was great. They did the training in different grade levels, sort of in the cafeteria setting. Then they went back and had the one-on-one discussion at the classroom level. And then they came back again, processed out. And also during that training, they did what we would call a walkabout. So each grade level went around and knew where the sort of rally points were where they should flee away from danger. And I thought that was great. And then some of the other principals, when they have these classrooms discussion, then there's another opportunity to come back and have lunch one-on-one with the principal or if staff has concerns. So there's different models. What we want to capture is what are those really best practices that we can replicate amongst all of our schools there. So I know this is very, can be very challenging, but I think this is the direction that we all need to go in. This is the direction that the state is going in. All of these commissions that we do the after-action reviews are suggesting this approach as well. So again, and we also need your feedback as a parent. What are the concerns that you all have? How can we better address that concern? And I think like you said, Dr. Conley, too, is that we may not know staff that has been traumatized or students been traumatized. So to be sensitive, you don't sort of wear that on your outside sleeve. But again, these are tough conversations to have.
Can you let parents know what kind of notice they'll have about when these drills are likely to occur and if they will know?
Sure. So every school should be sending home a notice in advance of these drills occurring to let you know that something's going to happen and prepare your kid for a conversation. What we don't want to have our students go in is to a cold experience and come home and say, Mom and Dad, this is what happened today. I'm anxious about it, and the parents not have a sense of what's taken place. So we've really tried to work with our principals to have communications before any of these trainings go forward, and even after the trainings to say, this happened, here counselors are still available, please have a conversation with us. If your child says that they're uncomfortable, anxious, it needs to be a community effort, and we need to have our support of our parents.
And it might also be helpful if in those communications that you can point parents to resources about how they might want to talk to kids about this, because frankly, this is new territory. Like, we all know how to read books to our kids, but we don't necessarily know how to have conversations about things like this, and guidance for parents could be useful.
And the really interesting thing that I saw at the two middle schools that I was at, they sort of had a really quick Google survey, and I would fail taking that, but these middle school kids were just great clicking and going to get some feedback. So I thought that was really, really creative to get immediate feedback as to any concerns that the students raised during the training. So that was really, really creative.
And there was also, I think you mentioned at one point that PTA members could possibly attend in small numbers some of the drills?
Yeah, we're going to try to set up an opportunity for PTA members to actually experience what the students are experiencing, so that it's not a surprise. What we want to do is get everyone engaged in the process, because that's how we support our kids. So when they come home and they say, this is what happened today, you know where it's coming from. We try to do this more and more to give our parents the experience of our students. We're doing it with our curriculum, we're doing it with our safety trainings, and we want to try to do it as often as possible.
You know, Derek, the other great thing is when we were at the Maryland Center for School Safety, every Monday we had a statewide school safety conference call. So now that I'm gone, I'm a participant. So on these statewide school safety calls, we talk about best practices. So we have and the law requires that every school has to have a school safety coordinator and a mental health services coordinator under that law. So we talk frequently. So we'll go out and see other drills. We may be having superintendent from St. Mary's County and their school safety security team come up here to observe some of our drills and training. So we're all sort of in this together, and if we could sort of cobble best practices from across the state and across the country, that's where I think we need to be. And this is sort of fluid, but again, what really works well for school safety and security amongst all of our student, staff, and the community.
And I think that's a good note to end on of our conversation. So now we want to open it up to our community who's in the audience. So our colleague's going to walk around with a microphone. If you just raise your hand, and she will bring the microphone to you. Just as a note, we're not going to address any personal student situations. So if you have like something about your own child, please come to us separately, because we want to keep your student privacy safe. But if you have questions generally or about a situation, we'd love to chime in.
Hi, my name is Anna White, and I have a son at Woodland Elementary School. I was curious about not just the training drills, but when there's an active shelter in place or lockdown, how is a decision made to go into lockdown? Just a couple weeks ago, Woodland Elementary School went into an active shelter in place because of an incident in downtown Silver Spring over a mile away. And I was curious, it seemed, no one in our neighborhood, I live in the same neighborhood as school, knew anything was going on. It's like everyone else is going around, but the school, it's like, oh my gosh, there's something happening a mile away. And I was, talking to my son, and he was saying the fifth graders were joking, oh my God, we're all gonna die. I mean, it was sort of a joke, but then there's a seriousness to it. And it seemed a little bit, like I haven't had a chance to talk to the principal, but it seemed a little bit overkill to go into shelter place or something a mile away. And Silver Spring, I don't know how often things happen with guns, but just curious about the decision process for actually going into an active lockdown or shelter in place.
I can take that. And one of those drills of the state, that would be a reverse evacuation. So if we had students outside and there was community danger, we would bring them inside. And a lot of times we'll get notified by Montgomery County Police Communications or the school resource officer that there's an incident within the community. Then the principal would evaluate, is there a need to sort of secure in place, not lock down, because in a lockdown there's an imminent risk to life safety. So if that community threat is out there in the community, we may bring in everyone from the outside. Academics would still continue, but we would just be in a heightened state of safety and security. So in that case, we'll look into that. I'm not sure where the information came from, but again, we don't want to overly go into those statuses if they're not really needed. But the more closer proximity to a community event or a criminal event in the community, we're going to go ahead and shelter, secure in place there, and bring those students from outside into that building there. But yeah, we need to look at it a mile away. Let us look into that. But again, communication is so important, and having those relationships with the local law enforcement so they can advise us what's occurring.
And there's two kind of reasons to go into shelter in place. One, there actually might be emergency student medical situation in a school, and that's usually academics go, but they don't want kids in the classroom to interfere when medical staff are trying to get in and out. So that's one reason we call shelter in place. The other is there's an incident community, but just to be clear, shelter in place is probably in place 90% of your day. So essentially our exterior doors are locked, and that's really what a shelter is, so that no one can get in. But academics go forward, and maybe recess gets postponed or gets moved. But generally, because we've gotten so thoughtful about locking all of our school doors, we're constantly in what would be perceived as a shelter, because we're just thinking about safety of our school buildings.
And I'm sure in that situation, if there were outside activities, those students were brought in from the playground into the school building until the threat or the all clear was given.
Any other questions?
So, okay, thank you. So thank you for doing this. Dr. Conley, what you explained about the SOS and Mr. Clark, the Maryland Be Safe, those are very encouraging that these are in place now after what the county's seen over the years. But the developmental stages of mostly adolescents, they don't want to report something because they're either worried about being the snitch or retaliation or a sense of betrayal toward their best friend, just their adolescent way of thinking. How is that being addressed so you have more people coming forward? And/or are you going to bring back the student assistance program where kids could help a friend anonymously because they're worried about all those things?
Right, and so the tip line is an anonymous system for reporting things. So we want students and parents to know that when a student does report to the tip line, it does have what's called two-way anonymous communication, where through the Maryland Center that receives the initial tip, they can communicate back and forth to the person that is given the tip to get additional information that where they do not have to disclose who they are, who the person is that has submitted this. And so through our SOS program, or Signs of Suicide Prevention program, it teaches students that, and it goes through scenarios like you say, you know, in terms of like, I don't want to snitch on my friend, I'm afraid of retaliation, I don't want to get in trouble for reporting this, and it goes through this, and it kind of goes through different scenarios like, the friend tells them not to say something, and then the person's like, okay, you're my best friend, I will do as you say, you know, I won't report, and it goes through like, you're wrong, don't do this, you know, this is what you should do, and why you should do it.
Is that in context outside of suicide as well?
Yeah, so it talks about scenarios where a child is depressed, and then it talks about scenarios where potentially a child, at the high school level, goes through a scenario where the student may go forth and become an active assailant or may want to go out and harm others. And then there's another scenario where the student is suicidal. So through those, and I think there's 5 scenarios in total, but in looking at that, it goes through each of those types of scenarios on what to do, and talks about the reasoning why you have to tell. And that also has a scenario for the high school lesson that goes into what happens when they knew about a friend who was suicidal, who then actually died by suicide, and how they wish they could have gone back and said something, how they wish they shouldn't have stayed quiet, because no matter what, their friend's life is more important than a friend potentially being angry at them for sharing. I'd rather my friend be alive than be mad at me than for me to have not said something and then for them have died. And so these are very important conversations that occur with our students as they go through that program, as they go through that training video that goes into each of those scenarios to teach them. Because it's not just, you know, because we go through that, like kids like, oh, I don't want to snitch on my friend. But the scenarios go into like, well, what happens when you don't? And what are the ultimate consequences that can occur if you don't share? And that's a big part of the program, is to tell them how to act and how to go tell that trusted adult to get help for their friend.
And that's age appropriate, grades 6 through 12?
Yes, and so there's a separate video for middle schoolers, and then there's a different video. So what I've described for you is what's in the high school video. And so
Just the one video or class, or how long a course is it?
it's just one class, so it's a 45-minute lesson. So it can fit within the class period. So if the class, so each high school has different periods, like it's between 40 to 45 minutes, and it fits in within there. And so there's a lesson for each grade. So right now, all middle schools, because they are, this is their first year in the program, they're all receiving the same video. They're all going through the same lesson. But at the high school, the freshmen who are coming in are receiving the freshman video. There's a separate lesson plan for sophomores, for juniors, and then there's what's called a second act program for the seniors, or a booster program that teaches them how to go for it and get help when you go to college or you're in a job or after you graduate, how to seek treatment. because we know that once they leave us, they're going to have to be their own consumers of their mental health, and that how do they go forward and get that help once they leave. And so it's differentiated based upon the grades. Next year, the middle schools will have a differentiation in grades. So like those students who have received the video this year, the upcoming 7th and 8th graders, they won't get the same video again. There'll be different lessons for 7th and for 8th grade. And so it's differentiated again based upon their grade level. And so, and again, so like this, middle schools have a separate video which has middle school students in it. And it talks about it in a different developmental way than what the high school kids get.
And how are students made aware of the tip line?
Information has been shared at the school. There are posters all over the school informing them about it. And so each principal has gone through and shared this information with the students. When the posters came from the Maryland School Safety Center, back before Ed came to us, those posters were then shared around the schools, and that information, and it's also on our websites for each school, and it has a link to the tip line, so students can go onto the school's website and our MCPS website in order to get information about the tip line as well.
This is also a great opportunity, I think, for parents to say, this is an app you need to have on your phone.
It's a free app. You can go download it in the App Store, so for the tip line.
Thank you. I was wondering what is being done to make sure that teachers become trauma-informed, and are there opportunities for parents to become trauma-informed as well?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question. And so I oversee, I'm very excited to get that. So I oversee the district's trauma-informed initiative. And so this year we have provide initial training where schools have been able to invite, we have about 30 trauma-informed trainers where we've been going around. We provided information for staff during the summer salary day. We've also gone around to their staff meetings this year. So as teachers and principals have requested for one of our trainers to come out to train the schools on this. But what we have done through our PSP framework is that we're going to have the training available for all staff starting next year, where they can go into a system what's called PDO. It's going to be an online webinar for them to take. And so that all staff members will be able to take part 1 of our trauma-informed teaching course that'll be available starting this summer. We are in the process of developing a phase 2 of that training, which will also be offered during salary days for all staff, for all teaching staff to be able to take. And then once we go through that, we work out all the kinks, and our goal is to put that online again as well. And then we're also in the process, I have a meeting tomorrow for my committee that's looking at this, in developing a toolkit for all schools that will have information and resources where they can go to in order to help them to become trauma-informed. And that training and that information, as we're developing this toolkit, we hope to have this information working with MCCPTA in terms of how can we take this to the parents so that they are aware of it as well, and providing additional resources and supports. So although we are kind of in our infancy in a sense, because we've been doing this for less than a year, but we are excited about it and providing additional services, supports, resources on this topic. We want to make sure that we're able to train our parents, our staff, and our students on this important topic of things to look for. Resiliency. Because it's not just about understanding, because when we look at the research on trauma, we can, like, some information from the Child Mind Institute came out, and that approximately 35 million children have the potential of experiencing trauma in their lives. And that when we look at like how many children are in the United States, and people like to ask me, like, well, how many children are in the United States? There's only 70 million. So when you think of 35 million, 70 million, that's one. When we look at a concept called adverse childhood experiences, and those 10 main areas that come from the initial study that came out of San Diego, and looking at those ways that a person can have an adverse childhood experience. And that what can we do if that has occurred? What can we do to build resiliency and assist with coping when these situations occur? What can we do to make sure our staff are aware that it's not just certain kids that have potentially experienced trauma, but this has the potential of impacting, potentially for a teacher, half of their class. And that it is an experience when you talk about, we need to have trauma-informed practices for all kids. And that we want to make sure our parents are aware of these things. What can we do to, again, build resiliency within our students, teaching them ways to cope. We have several mindfulness initiatives that are occurring around the district. We hope to expand that as another way of helping students cope when these potentially bad things have occurred. We're also looking at a statewide initiative that started in West Virginia called Handle with Care, so that when situations occur at the home and that our outside agencies and our law enforcement stakeholders, partners are helping us through this, that they inform us when things happen in the communities at home that can provide that additional support for our students when they come to school, and that we want to make sure that we are aware and that we handle that student with care when these situations occur. So as I said, I could talk all day about this. I'm not going to, because we have people who have other questions. But this is starting, this initiative that is starting, and we're hoping to continue to expand upon this in MCPS.
Thank you very much for having us. I am a parent of 2 middle schoolers. I'm the vice president of the PTA at our middle school, and I work as a substitute teacher, often in long-term positions. I have a lot of concerns about the active shooter, the new training, and my main concern is that I first heard about it from my middle schooler. So I went on the website, I tried to learn more. I was unable to get information as a parent or a substitute teacher. How can I learn more? Where can I find the documents? Where, when, and I understand maybe the trainings are just starting to occur. I was a little unclear. But, it's something I would like to learn more about. How can I do that?
All right.
I think we can work on that with Derek and get some information out. We'll put some general information out and link to other sites, but we may not share the actual specifics, because we have to be careful about that, but we can do a much better job of sharing that information with you and looking at the other initiatives out there as well.
And as a substitute teacher,
Yeah.
I have no idea what I'm supposed to be doing if this is my situation. So that's a real concern.
Thank you.
Thank you for that feedback, and we can work with our partners in the Office of Human Resources and Development as trainings come about to make sure that our substitutes are trained in this. And also another thing, so our high schools have finished, but our middle schools are still working on this. So it may be that your child's middle school haven't received it yet. And so like our elementary schools we haven't gotten there yet at all. And so they're happening in the spring. And so we just want to, Bill, we can talk to you later and find out which middle school is it, so we can get information on when that is occurring, so.
But Derek, also, the MCPS did send out a community-wide communication at the end of January about that with some links. And through MCCPTA, we also sent, before the drills started being rolled out, we shared some information about that with some links as well. So if you're a PTA president, you should have gotten that through your vice president. So it goes to the president. So we try to get it to as many people. And we also share it on our Facebook page. So, but if there are also questions about that, feel free to come to MCCPTA and we can share with you what is out there and accessible.
And if you check online, we have a page dedicated to safety and security that has all the resources together now, from information about cameras, information about lockdown with options, and a one-pager that I believe is up there that talks about both what the training and drill is, but also some of the frequently asked questions about where'd you come up with this idea? How are kids supposed to behave? Is there a differentiation between grade levels? So I think all that can be found on our website. Just as a time check, I know I want to be mindful of your time. We'll do about 2 more questions, and then we'll let you go, and then we're happy to stick around for a few extra minutes to talk after the event is over.
Well, thank you as well for being here and providing this important information. I'm a parent of high school students, and I'm just wondering if individual high schools or the system, MCPS as a whole, can provide statistics more on the mental health side, that if individual high schools can report how many incidences of mental health there has been at a particular school, and why or why not, and also, for other high schools as well. And just a side comment on the SOS program. In theory, it seems to be a good starting point, I guess, to bring awareness about mental health. But I almost think that it needs to go further. It's almost like it has to be built into the curriculum, and that a significant amount of time needs to be devoted to mental health at all of the schools as part of, like a subject matter for the day. It's very troubling. And when you see that the CDC, I think, reports that 1 in 5 kids have mental health issues between the ages of 12 and 19 or something, it's startling, the job that you have at hand. So thank you.
Right, and absolutely. And so when we talk about, like you said, that number in 1 in 5 is correct, and that is something that we promote when we talk with our student leaders and with our staff in our schools. And so that is why the superintendent has put forth this physical, social, psychological well-being initiative in our schools. And so that is starting at the beginning of next school year, where we're going to be having training for all staff as part of, we have these kind of annual compliance trainings that occur, and that we are ensuring that all of our staff are aware of our PSP initiative. We are working with all of our stakeholders within MCPS, and that we are, like right now, like I've been working with Kara Grant within our, she oversees our physical education and health curriculum. We are working with our other partners within our elementary and secondary education and how can we embed these things within our curriculum. And so we are in the process of looking at all the curriculum and all of our any other types of standalone trainings that we provide and how that all fits in, and making sure that we are within our 6 essentials. How are we going to embed this within our curriculum, not just within PE and health, but then also within our normal, let's say within our English language arts curriculum, our social studies curriculum. One of the big examples that I like to use is, so let's say at the high school and you're having a conversation around Romeo and Juliet, right? So what are some big topics that we can have when we have a conversation around Romeo and Juliet? So anybody think back to Romeo, what is a big thing that happens when we talk about Romeo and Juliet at the end? The suicide, right? And so how can we tie that in when we have that conversation with Romeo and Juliet? Also talking about dating, appropriate dating strategies, right? And also what happens with conflicts that occur. So when we have, when we talk about, Romeo and Juliet, and there are little different groups, the Mercutios, and what's the other group that they have? And the Capulets, yes, and the conflict that is there. So what are ways so that we can tie back into our normal curriculum, right, and have these conversations and helping teachers to guide those conversations? So let's say you have 2 groups that are in conflict. What are some better ways to manage that conflict instead of getting into fights with each other, right? That goes into our character education and our conflict management parts of our PSP initiative. All that ties in. So as you say, we have to tie that into what we're teaching every day in the classroom, so that not a, kind of like, oh, good, oh, today's our, SOS training. Oh, goodness. And kids are like, oh, I don't want to come to school today because we're going to talk about SOS. No, we want to make sure that we have a conversation around SOS, but we do, like you say, we do have to tie it into our curriculum. And that is a part of our physical, social, and psychological well-being framework. These are the conversations that we're having. We're actually in a place with my boss, Dr. Bryce. We're having weekly meetings to discuss this and how we're going to embed this. How are we going to teach this to all of our kids, pre-K through 12? Because we know SOS is only at our secondary level, because there isn't a research-informed curriculum for elementary school for suicide. So how are we going to start having those conversations earlier on, starting in preschool? Like our preschools right now use the second STEC curriculum and talking about social skills, and how are we starting to have these conversations earlier on? And so, yes, you're right. We are aware of this. We are going to start the implementation of this framework next school year. And so we're building it now. There'll be a presentation to our superintendent in April with another presentation to the board in May.
And before those presentations, there are a number of opportunities for parents to engage in the review process of the draft PSP framework. So there's one tomorrow morning, which I think is chock full. And there's another one on February 26th at the MCCPTA Delegates Assembly, where Dr. Bryce will be presenting the framework to parents and looking for feedback.
But I'm sorry, can you speak to the reporting of mental health illnesses or incidences at schools?
Right, and so due to student confidentiality, we do not report on that.
I'm not asking for names, numbers. If you were to hear, like, there's a burglar within a block of the school, you would get a notice of that. Now, what about if you heard there was a breakdown in a bus, you would hear about that. So what about mental health extremes?
But again, due to the confidentiality of that, because we know students talk about things, we want to make sure that we are protecting students' rights. And many of our parents do not want that information disclosed to others. So we don't disclose that unless there's an incident where an actual student has, let's say, died by suicide, where we have a crisis team that comes into the school and works with students, and we want our parents to be aware of that. Those are the only times that we report out on mental health situations that have occurred. So we just, because of the significant nature in terms of, and especially around the stigma around mental health, that we do not disclose that information when those things do occur. And it's just, it's not within our MCPS practice to go forward and disclose that at this time.
So, I'm sorry, just to get clarification, so are you saying that it is possible to be disclosed if a suicide occurred?
If a student has died by suicide and we are aware of that, that information, when the crisis team does go out to a school, that a letter does go out to the parents within that community to let them know that a student has died, and that here are some resources and supports that you can provide for your students, because we are also aware of contagion that can occur when a suicide has occurred. And so we want to make sure that a letter does go out to the community, to the parents when that does occur, and what are some resources that are available for those families. And that, and the training that we provide for that. We actually have pamphlets on the back there of the training that we provide to our staff members called Prepare. When crises, mental health emergencies do occur within our schools and crises that occur, so you can get additional information about the training that we do provide to our staff on how to go into schools when students have died or other types of emergencies have occurred.
All right, well, Gillian, Ed, Christina, thank you guys so much for this great conversation. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I really appreciate everyone coming out. So thank you, and have a good night.
Thank you.